Hello and welcome back to No Longer Legally Detained, the podcast about life after the psych ward. How do you navigate being an adult when you never expected to be one? It's all about life with a different brain and what it means to heal on your own terms. So hello, I'm Hannah. I'm autistic. I am ADHD. I have a pathological demand avoidance profile of autism, or often now known as pervasive drive for autonomy, because it does sound better. I also have struggled with my mental health, and this week is Mental Health Awareness Week, and I thought, what better episode to do than one all about mental health? And um, mental health is something that I have struggled with a lot in my life, and it's something that I'm really passionate about. It's something that I think is still so misunderstood, and I think something that's still so stigmatized, and something that we need to talk about more, but in the right way. I think we do talk a lot about mental health these days, but I still think that we often miss the mark on the things that are really important and really essential that we do talk about. So, as we know, with our new format, I have a script so that I can stay a little bit more on track. But for Mental Health Awareness Week, I wanted to talk about the topic of community, because community is what is the theme of Mental Health Awareness Week in the UK this year. And I think it's something that's really, really interesting and really, really important. And community is something that I definitely didn't have, and in some ways I don't think I still fully have. But I do think that it's something that is absolutely essential for your mental well-being and for mental illness recovery, mental health sustainability, all of those things. I think community is a massive thing, but what is community, and how does that work when maybe you don't feel like you've got it or don't feel like you'll ever be able to get it? And for this episode, I am going to be focusing on complex PTSD. So it's something that I've not really addressed on the podcast so far. And it's something that has meant that I've got a very messy and layered relationship with the word community. And yeah, it's a tricky one. So let's start with what is complex PTSD. Now, as always, this is purely based on my experiences. This podcast is like a storytelling platform for me. I'm not a doctor, not a psychologist, psychiatrist. I've got no kind of anything like that. So it's purely my experiences and me just sharing kind of my journey, and hopefully with that other people feel less alone. But yeah, so what is complex PTSD? For me, complex PTSD is something that I was diagnosed with over a year ago, and it's the difference between PTSD is that whereas people picture PTSD as kind of being a singular traumatic event, like an accident or a natural disaster or a war, complex PTSD is different. It's like a trauma that happens over time, often in relationships, often during childhood or in institutions. And what happens when it's what happens when safety isn't given, and when trust was broken over and over again by people who are supposed to care. It can come from emotional neglect, abuse, chronic invalidation, being repeatedly dismissed or punished for expressing needs. And it really does leave a mark. Not just the flashbacks or the nightmares, although those do happen too, but deep emotional and relational wounds. Things like fear of abandonment, but also fear of closeness, emotional flashbacks, those sudden shame spirals with no clear trigger, feeling permanently othered or unsafe even in calm situations, chronic people pleasing or fawning responses, dissociation, hypervigilance, and difficulty trusting your own memory or perception. It's exhausting and is often missed, especially in people who are seen as high functioning or resilient or just sensitive. And I think that it's something that for a long time I didn't even realize I had trauma. I think trauma is something that can be really kind of a term that's overused, and in some ways, but also actually the thing is like it's misused. Actually, probably more than overused, it's misused. Like trauma is something that we all have. Like it's an like a wound, I guess, on to a person, but PTSD doesn't develop in all cases, and complex PTSD doesn't develop in all cases, and we all have trauma. We don't all then go on to develop PTSD or complex PTSD, and I think that's something really important. Obviously, like if you're interested in that, go and do your research, go and find some people who are the doctors on that kind of subject. But yeah, I was diagnosed with complex PTSD in January 2024, I think. And yeah, it was a really interesting kind of experience of learning that actually all the things that I'd experienced that I thought maybe were just normal or maybe okay, actually maybe weren't. And it was kind of quite a journey of discovery of being like, oh wait, this is like, it kind of unsettles the ground you were under. And they often say with trauma recovery that actually it gets worse before it gets better. And it's definitely the case in lots of ways. But since like being able to acknowledge my trauma, and obviously that's been a journey and it's not like happened straight away and it's been, and it's still happening, I have definitely made like the most progress I ever have. And actually it's been the closest I have to letting people in. And I definitely have let people in now. Now that I know that that's what it was. And so, yeah, that was really big kind of progress for me. So, in terms of Mental Health Awareness Week, I wanted to speak about like community, and when that is like under the source of the wound. And I think that that's really interesting because for me, my complex PTSD and kind of the root of my mental health problems was caused by people, and therefore I have a very big mistrust of people. But the only way to recover is to let people in, and that can be such like a juxtaposition, I think that's the word, where like, what do you do when like the people are the reason you don't trust people, but you need to trust people to be able to get better? And they say with like relational trauma that it's really important to build safe relationships, and it can be really hard to let people back in. Also, I think, and I'm gonna be totally honest here, like I have let people back in a little bit and they've hurt me again. And even if it's different people, and I think that can be really hard because other people are, they're obviously out of our control. Like they're not something that we can, you know, necessarily like preempt, and they're really unpredictable. And I think that's something that like for trauma survivors and then people with complex PTSD, like when a lot of our like symptoms and a lot of our behavior is a need for control and a need for to be able to feel in control, to feel safe. Hence why people are really scary and people are like a massive fear, and why we kind of push people away and build up those walls, and then to let people in and to find your community with the massive fear that you're going to get hurt again, or that if that people are going to judge you or people are going to hurt you, really, like, is the most terrifying thing. And therefore, like, we end up being these very isolated like little islands, and we kind of push ourselves away. And that is definitely what I do, because when it's just me, I know that I can keep myself safe. Whereas if I let anybody else in, they might hurt me. And even some of the most well-intentioned people have, because we're all human, we all make mistakes, we all say things we all don't understand. We can't, for a lot of people, if you've never experienced complex PTSD, you've never experienced the kind of significant trauma that results in complex PTSD, and that's not again, like, it's not a trauma from it. I really hate trauma. It's literally my biggest pet peeve. Is like, I'll get on to that in a bit, but I've lost my train of thought now. But like, if you haven't experienced it, you cannot fathom that level of like fear and pain and being stuck in a situation where you are terrified for your life constantly. And I think that unless you've experienced that, you just can't even begin to understand that, and therefore it can be invalidating to people. And I think that's actually like what my kind of, as I've learned like over the years, is that actually I don't want you to tell me that you relate. Actually, like, it's not to say that like I think I'm the worst, experience the worst. I really, really don't. Like, there are so many people who have it so much worse than me. But I think that when we look at it like that, it just invalidates our own experiences, and everybody's experience is valid. And I think that I have this a lot when people come up to me and they're like, oh, they're like, they'll start talking and they're like, oh no, I shouldn't tell you about that because you've experienced a lot worse. I'm like, but I still want to hear about your experiences. I still want to be there to support you. Just because I've experienced, X, Y, and Z doesn't mean that I'm not interested in your ABC. Like, you know what I mean? I I don't. It isn't a competition. It isn't a comparison. And like, yes, some of the things that certain people experience are like really horrific, and you can't compare that to something else that's like, you're nail breaking. But that's not the point, because it's about the impact on the person. And I think that while we're constantly trying to kind of see who's more valid, we actually ignore everybody's needs. And actually, like, it's about coming together, being a community, and that thing of like listening and being there for everybody. And actually, it's all valid and it's all inexperience. And I think that for me, like, I would much prefer, like, obviously, you know with someone, if I like tell my story and people are like, oh my god, like what the hell, like that's the worst thing I've ever heard in my entire life, like obviously it's a bit jarring, but not really. Like I find it more jarring when people try to pretend that they understand, because especially if I know that they can't, and I think we can never understand anybody else's experience anyway. And actually, just like someone being like, "I'm just really here for you, and I'm listening, and I'm like, I want to hold space for whatever you've got to say, and like however you're feeling, and not try to like problem solve or like make like kind of end that kind of feeling, and like letting me just sit in that feeling for however long I need to." I wanted to also talk a bit about the overlap between autism and complex PTSD. And as an autistic person, my complex PTSD often gets tangled in with my sensory needs, my social exclusion, and the fact that I already feel like I speak a different language sometimes. And when you add in kind of like masking and like shutdowns, rejection sensitivity, institutional trauma, all of those other bits, and like also that thing of like autism being a social communication disorder, and therefore struggling with that kind of ability to make friends, but then also adding in that I have a PDA profile, so pathological demand avoidance or pervasive drive for autonomy, and that often makes someone more sociable on the surface but struggle more underneath. I also have the thing of like I don't look disabled, inverted commas. If you're watching the video you can see, and I think that like that people assume that like I've just got a resting bitch face, or I'm just not a very nice person, or I'm just kind of like, yeah, basically a bitch. And actually, I'm not. That is my defense mechanism. That's my trauma. That's my autism. That's my kind of wall that I put up to protect myself. And it can be really hard when you spend your whole life kind of overthinking. And also, I have the whole ADHD thing of like being too much. I've always been told I'm too much, too much, too much, too much. And that really does leave an impact on someone when, like, in every situation, you're told you're too much, you're too loud, you're too in people's faces, you're attention seeking. And like that really can grind down on a person and make them feel as if they aren't they aren't valid in who they are, and like scared to just be in any kind of place. So what did I do about kind of community and what helped me in my recovery? So for those who don't know, I spent 5 years in and out of inpatient services, and I um was discharged in August 2021, I think. I have to remember, like I got it wrong. I did an Instagram post of like 4 years out, and I think it was only 3. Anyway, live, laugh, love. So I've nearly been out 4 years, and that was kind of an achievement that I never ever thought that I would be able to do. It's kind of completely crazy when I was stuck kind of in hospital. And it's interesting, I think probably my first community, if I'm totally honest, was inpatient. I think that I'd kind of, the way I'd grown up and like way school had been, when I finally like broke, I'd never even heard of like inpatient. I didn't know what that was. And when I went into CAMS for the, I don't know how long that's been dead for, and that could actually be quite devastating. But anyway, completely forgotten where I was up to. Yeah, I think it was about inpatient and community, and yeah, I think that like that's why I'm so passionate about like peer support and outside groups, because I think that unfortunately inpatient can often be the first time someone has ever felt like they're with their people, and obviously like that's can be a really like dangerous and like not a great environment to do that. And obviously like um one of my well, actually, to be fair, all of my CAMS units I went into, although there was a lot of trauma there and a lot of like bad experiences, there was also a lot of amazing people, and it was the first time that I'd ever felt like seen and ever like really truly kind of made friends. And like although that they're not, they like, it's hard to say because I still do talk to some of them now, but like obviously that isn't the place to make friends, and like people are poorly, and I think that like the narrative that like these places are like a boarding school is not the case. And I think that we need to change the system to put more early intervention in place so that actually people can find their community properly, find their community, and not have this like, kind of like fake community, which unfortunately gives people a sense of like belonging somewhere that they can't, if that makes sense. I don't know whether that makes any sense, but anyway. And unfortunately, when I went into adult services, it was a whole different ballgame, and it was really, really horrible and really, really traumatic. And I think that I kind of, by the end of my adult admission, it was like, I've got a choice. Like either I'm gone, or like I've got to get better, because I can't be in any of these places anymore. and I got a job, which was like kind of my first kind of community, and it was with so it was at the same place that my mum worked, and again that was amazing. Like obviously it was still really jarring at times, and like it wasn't my dream job or anything like that, but it began like a place of just being around people. And I think that community can sometimes be misconstrued as like it has to be somewhere that you feel like you fully belong, and I think that it doesn't necessarily have to be straight away. And I think that actually it's about just having places that you go and like you belong in different times and different like parts of you, if that makes sense. So like yeah, I got my job and then I like started getting into like theatre, and again like the first theatre school I like went to, they kicked me out in the end and like that obviously really hurt and like obviously added to more trust issues. But like I knew like deep down that I did have such a massive love for like the performing arts and the creative sector. And although that a lot I've met a lot of people in this sector who maybe aren't the nicest of people, I've also met some of the most amazing people. And you know, from there then probably the biggest sense of community that I got was from the activism and like the third the third sector, like the charity sector, and like my activism, my advocacy work, like that is where I truly like feel like I belong. And although like I don't necessarily have people, I have a sense of community within the performing arts and within the activism space. And you know, now I'm really lucky that I like do have friends and I do have people who I can count on and that I love. And like this past week has been quite tricky, and I think it's been one of those weeks that's like where people are just so jarring and like you're just like I can't, like I just don't think I've got anything, and like everyone's just so annoying and no one understands and no one's listening and they're all just being really annoying. Like I do know that I do have people and that people do care, and like as hard as it is and as like draining and tiring and like misunderstood that I can feel, because no one else can understand my experience, because only I can understand my experience, just the same as I can't understand anyone else's experience. You know, there are people out there, and like as much as they will make mistakes and they'll fuck up and they'll say the wrong thing and they'll do the wrong thing and they'll make me feel worse, most of them have my best interests at heart and they want to do the best. And I think that like finding a space where you are able to show up as you authentically and unapologetically is so important. And it's also acknowledging that like within a community people are going to make mistakes, people are going to mess up, you're going to mess up, you're going to make mistakes. It's not going to be perfect, it's not going to be somewhere that like all the time you feel like smooth sailing, like it's not going to be like that. And if you're looking for that kind of perfection, you're always going to come up short. And I think that like the biggest change for me was realizing that like community is like not a thing. Again, it's another one of those things, it's the journey not a destination, like cringy and cliche. And actually like sometimes some of us might need lots of different spaces, we might need lots of different communities, and like we can build our own communities in a non-binary and like non, you know, neurotypical way. And like doesn't community doesn't have to look like one thing, it doesn't have to look like, oh, I'm in this group and that's what who I am and that's where I sit. Like you can sit in loads of different groups and you can have different groups for different needs, and you can have different people for different needs, and you can have different things for different needs. And actually like just I do think that the biggest thing in my recovery was learning that like I am valid as who I am, I can show up how I show up, and I deserve to take up space, and I am okay being me, like whoever I am, whatever I look like, whatever I do, as long as I'm not hurting anybody else, I'm absolutely valid in who I am. And I think that that was like my biggest change. And like loneliness is a massive epidemic, especially within young people, and like I feel that loneliness to my core, and it is so hard, it is so hard to reach out, it's so hard to find your people, because a lot of us are so scared about being burdens, we're so scared about like reaching out. I think especially for like people who have, you know, very long histories of mental health problems, and like who've kind of struggled for many years. I definitely like, for me, if I reach out and say like, oh, I'm struggling, people will assume the worst and assume that I am maybe a risk to myself, and then want to call professionals. And then I'm like, oh, whoa, no, can we like take a step back? But then if it's not that, then people are like, oh, well, then you're fine. And I think that there needs to be more of a conversation of like, absolutely, if someone is a risk, an immediate risk to themselves or others, there needs to be, professional involvement straight away. However, if someone isn't, and they still may, their feelings maybe still like really strong and really valid and doesn't invalidate how they're feeling, but they might not need that response. They might just want someone to come and give them a hug. They might just want someone to come and colour. They might just want someone to come and do a craft with them. And like, I think that the biggest thing that we're missing at the moment in terms of like suicide prevention and mental health is proactive kind of checking in and support. And I think that's something that we all have a responsibility for. Like, we all have that responsibility to check in with that friend, to ask how they're doing, ask if they're okay twice. Notice that person sat, in your college on the floor in the corner, and like people are just walking past. And when someone asks them if they're okay, they say they're okay quickly. Stop and sit with them for 2 minutes. Really see if they're okay. Offer to play a game with them. Offer to go around to your friend's house and cook tea and watch a movie. Offer an activity. Be that tutor who reaches out rather than constantly reaches in rather than constantly expecting other people to reach out. I think when it comes to mental health, and when you're struggling, you already feel like such a burden and so like a problem is like such a bad person, which you're not, to clarify. But that is when the job of other people comes in to be able to reach in. And obviously then if someone reaches in, you need to take that kind of olive branch and go with it. But I think that there needs to be more of the reaching in, because as much as we can tell people to reach out, I have been that person who reaches out, and there is nothing more damaging and hurtful than reaching out and being met with nothing. And I think that like it's a societal kind of job for us all to work together, for people to reach out, and when people do reach out, that we actually actively listen and validate how they're feeling. But also it's our job to also reach in and check in on people. Don't necessarily take their first answer. Ask people if they're okay twice. Offer kind of, and also that thing of checking in and spending time with people even when they're not struggling. And I think that we can have this this narrative that like people only kind of offer the support or only offer time when someone's struggling. And I know we're all so short for time, but then often that kind of reinforces a narrative that like you can only get help, you're only valued, you're only listened to when you're struggling. And I think that like actually that can perpetuate someone to being more poorly, because they're only actually getting seen when they're not very well. And I think that's something very interesting about like the inpatient system, is that actually like when you're in inpatient, although it's really horrific and horrible, I think is a case for a lot of people who that's the first time that they've actually ever felt like seen. And therefore, like when they come out of hospital, then they've got nothing because there's no community support, there's nothing. Then of course, why would you not go back in? It's a bit like with the justice system, and like when people in a different way like get out and they've got no money, they've got no job, they've got no home, well then they're gonna reoffend so that they've got a roof over their head and like food. So like I think it is that thing of like, if what community looks like within all of like society is that thing of just seeing each other, hearing each other, listening to each other in all states we are as humans. And I wanted to share a poem that I actually wrote the other day, when I was feeling a little bit invisible. And I think that it's something that I wanted to share on the podcast for Mental Health Awareness Week. And it's called Am I Invisible? Am I invisible because my condition's not critical? Do you not understand me? You seem pretty angry. Is it because I'm not cured? My defiance endured. You thought I'd be easy, but now my presence makes you queasy. You tell me it's not, yet I still feel like a blot. My existence annoying, now I'm self-destroying. Actions speak more, of me you have bore. You won't even look, not noticed I'm now a closed book. Don't even try, but I understand why. This is what always transpires. I daren't call you all liars, but you said you were different, that you're not that ignorant, but you've never met me, the girl no one wants to be. I can just sit all alone, or behind my phone. My tears will fall, still no one answers my call. When I said at the start, you'd all depart, this is what I mean. All I wish is to maybe be seen, to be valued even when I'm not perfect, to be shown as me now, I am worth it. All I want is someone to notice. I don't need all of the focus. But behind this facade, I'm about to play my last card. I think that we all have a part to play in supporting people with mental health. And I think that there is so much rhetoric at the moment around people's mental health and like that kind of exclusion and that kind of blame culture. And for me, I think the important part is that we, in times like this, we need to come together. We need to listen. We need to be, and often the biggest thing we can give anybody is our time, is giving them a hug, spending time. And I think that like that can be a gift that is truly life-saving. So this Mental Health Awareness Week, if all you do is take a deep breath and acknowledge that stuff is real, that's enough. If you're struggling and you can tell one safe person that you are, that is enough. If you can reach into somebody, offer them your time, offer them a hug, thank you. And remember that it's all at your own pace. Life is a journey. It's hard, it's rough, it's really jarring, but it is worth it, even on those hardest days. So yeah, if you remember that, this podcast is now independent. So there should be a new episode every Sunday. Obviously today is Monday, but I was poorly. I still kind of am, but you know, we live, laugh, laugh, keep moving. I also co-host the You Don't Need a Hamster, You Need a Therapist, which is out on Mondays with Millie, and it's very chaotic, raw and real. And please do check me out on Instagram and TikTok at Legally Detained. Follow the podcast on Instagram at No Longer Legally Detained, the podcast, NLLD, the podcast. And thank you for listening. Thank you for surviving. And if no one has told you today, you're allowed to take up space, even if you still flinch when people get close. Community is possible, so is healing. And if you don't have to figure it all out at once. I'll see you next Sunday. Bye-bye.